the night that they were having their meeting, their elections for, executive officers, and Tim Loggins came up with his phone, waving his phone, saying that, well, no, wait, they've changed and now inactives can vote. Okay, so now understand, for years, inactives have not been able to vote, and Belinda Harris Ritter, who was the chair at the time of the Rules Committee, she was in our county committee. She's a member, and multiple times saw that we didn't let inactives vote. Never stood up, never said, "Hey, wait a minute, no, they can vote."
Well, in fact, I've been to meetings and inactives didn't vote. It's not opinion. The fact is that inactives
rules are rules.
Well, whether it's a rule or not, frankly, my point is that what had taken place during my whole time there is that inactives were not permitted to vote, quite plainly so, and indeed, perhaps as a matter of logic as well. Mm-hmm. But so I just want to give that background.
Correct. And what I just handed Dave is from the convention back in 2000, I believe it was 18, where, it states they can't vote. That's been the logic. Every county committee has operated like that. Yeah, so
let me read it. All right.
Okay, sure.
So people know what it says. Article 2, County Committee, Section 2.E, membership, page 15. If a county committee member misses 3 or more regular consecutive meetings without sending a proxy, that member shall be deemed inactive and will not count against quorum while the member is inactive. The inactive member may not issue a proxy pursuant to Article 1, Section 9, and may not serve, and this is in italics, and may not serve as a voting member of the county executive committee. Rationale: if an inactive member is not permitted to be a voting member of a county committee, they should not be permitted to be a voting member of a county executive committee.
Correct.
Just makes sense.
Right.
Okay.
And that's what was passed at the convention. So all of a sudden that night, Tim Loggins comes up waving his phone around saying, no, the chair of the Rules Committee has decided they can vote. They've changed it. You have to let the inactive people vote tonight.
Okay, so can this person that he's naming willy-nilly make those kinds of decisions?
No, she was the chairman of the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee had not met yet to decide that. We didn't know. Nobody had heard anything. Understand, I asked Barry, I said, have you gotten an email today from anybody saying that there's been any kind of change or chairman? I had stepped down. I wasn't a chairman anymore.
Right.
So I obviously wouldn't have received that. But I said, did you receive anything from them? And he said, no, I haven't received anything. So we called the person who was the first district chair at that time, Sarah Dunklin, and Sarah said, of course they can't vote. Inactives can't vote. So Barry said, okay, the ruling of the chair is that inactives cannot vote tonight. And Tim stood up and he challenged the decision of the chair, which was his right as a member. And so Barry took a vote and he said, okay, he's challenged my decision. What do you all think? They all decided that that inactive members could not vote. That's what the body decided, right?
So to me, they found the right decision.
Right. But see, the problem is that night, a lot of people ran for election. They ran for different positions. Tim was one of those people who ran for first vice chair and he lost. Okay, so they all lost that night. Mm-hmm. So 3 days later, a complaint was filed. Now, there were other stupid things in the complaint about, like, Tim didn't like what people were putting on their personal Facebook pages. He didn't like that. So he filed a complaint.
It's a personal Facebook page.
Exactly. But he says, well, you can't be a member. Later on, he came back and said, well, you can't be a member of an organization and talk badly about it and expect to remain a member. So in other words, yeah, they were removed because,
according to him.
Right. And in this political organization, you can't, and then where have we heard this before? You don't talk badly about other Republicans. Mm-hmm. You don't call out rules being broken. You don't call out this stuff. Well, if you are not calling it out, you are a Democrat because you are not standing for what's right. You're no different than Joe Biden.
Well, if we have elections on people or policies in the committee, in the party, then there's going to be disagreements. So how can it be that you can't call out something that you disagree with? That means you can never have an election. There's only one person would run for each position, and there would be no opposed policies.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll remind you, Dave, and I remain a member of the party, and I think that the Republican Party is a good organization to be involved in.
Yep.
But I wrote a column a few weeks ago about how the executive committee created a Arkansas poll tax to run in the Arkansas primaries.
We talked about
That's
that.
right. Because now it's an analogy, of course, because there's always been a fee to run in the Arkansas primaries. It's same, well, not necessarily the same. Not always, by the way. Early on, when the party was couldn't get anybody to run, when we were blue dog Democratic state, there was no fee to run for any of those positions because they
Kind
needed
of like
people
it
to
is
run.
to be a Democrat
Right,
now.
right. But it's just economics. So I don't have a problem with the notion of some modest fee to run in the primary. But they took the fee to run for governor from 15 grand to 40 grand.
Mm-hmm.
There's only one word that describes that behavior: ridiculous. They took the fee from AG and lieutenant governor from $12,500, doubled it to $25,000. They didn't change the fee to run for congressman, U.S. congressman. Oh, wait, they did that 2 years ago, where they doubled it. They doubled it, I think, from 15 grand to 30 grand. I think that's what they went. So it's really this sort of progression towards exclusion. And I was criticized by a well-known Republican who I won't mention at the moment, because you know me, I'm very subtle about what
I know you are.
That's right. Very discreet and subtle about my criticisms of people. But I had said that there is an unfortunate vein in Arkansas politics of plutocracy, which means electing the rich. And I don't mean rich as in the guy has a big mansion. I mean those who are able to sort of pile up big amounts of money in their war chests.
Yeah, to be able to pony up the cash to run.
Right. That's right. And so my rhetorical question in my column of, 2 weeks ago or so, was, still think that my claim about plutocracy is not accurate? So yes, I remain happily a member of the Republican Party here in Arkansas, but what that executive committee did with raising fees is reprehensible.
You and I still belong to the party because we want to fight within the party.
Right. And they haven't kicked us out.
They haven't kicked us out
Your
yet.
time's coming.
Yeah, but Lori Justice,
coming.
on the other hand, would like to be able to fight on the inside in the party and can't because the party decided that she stepped over some invisible line somewhere that makes her non.
What they did is they retroactively punished all of us. Because see, here's what. So again, nobody said anything to us. There was no emails. Nobody sent anything out to chairman. This just came from an individual, right? The rules have changed. Nobody's heard anything until April 7th. Okay, understand this. That meeting was January 28th. So until April 7th, nobody hears anything, right? And so then all of a sudden on April 7th, the chairman got this email that says on February 28th, the Republican Party of Arkansas Rules Committee met to address issues raised regarding whether inactive members of the Republican Party of Arkansas county committees can vote.
Okay.
So a month after this meeting is when the committee met and decided they could vote.
Well, so let me ask you, by the way, Lori, because I have filled out proxies generally when I've not been able to attend our local meetings. And unfortunately, I've had classes on Thursday nights, so it has been difficult. And then I have another organization that I'm involved in that often meets on Thursday night. And that's when the Pulaski County Committee meets often. So I've missed a handful of meetings, but I've sent proxies. Do I no longer pursuant to this rule, need to send a proxy? Because if I'm inactive and still can vote, what's the difference?
Well, what they're claiming is that inactive members don't count toward, they're acknowledging they don't count toward quorum.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And they cannot send a proxy. Okay.
But
so
they
if you're,
can vote.
but you can if you show up in person. So your proxy is your power of attorney for your vote, right? You're not allowed to do that. You can't send somebody else to vote for you.
But
if you show up in person, you can still vote.
And then what does it take to become active again? Just showing up 3 times in a row?
I would assume, the 2 times in a row, because then you become an active member again. But see, at what they're doing, so someone could come in during filing period, they could become a member, not come for 2 years, and then show up and vote for executive committee officers, which is the whole reason Doyle Webb didn't want that. That's why this became the way it did, because they wanted you to be an active member and know what was happening to vote.
If you want to allow people not to come to weekly meetings or monthly meetings, that's an acceptable notion. You can debate whether it's preferable or not, but just tell me what the rule is.
Right.
And the problem with in your situation up in Jonesboro is you weren't even part of that committee and making these decisions. You were chosen as a parliamentarian, and you made a judgment call, which is only a recommendation, as the parliamentarian. So even if you got it wrong, and doesn't sound like you got it wrong, but even if you got it wrong, how is that something that's improper?
It's not, but that's part of the problem, and all of the things that people were accused of, that they accused Barry and those guys of, it was just incorrect. We have a website people can go to, and it's www.arkansasgop.info. You can go and read the entire complaint is up there that Tim Loggins and the people who signed this complaint are complaining about. Go read it. All the documents are there. Now, this is interesting. I printed this. So these are some of the people who filed the complaint, who signed on to the complaint. Okay, so there's a couple of swing voters. Now, this is from GOP Data Center, which is the data center that the Republican Party uses. What does that one say?
I can.
It says weak Democrat.
Oh, okay.
Now, this is their county judge up in Craighead County. His name is Marvin Day. Hard Democrat.
Okay.
Hard Democrat. He signed the complaint too. Now, these are members of the Republican committee. Keep in mind this one. Weak Democrat. Weak Democrat. Sanders to the State Highway Commission.
Weak Democrat.
Weak Democrat. Weak Democrat. Weak Democrat. And this one was appointed by Sarah Sanders to the State Real Estate Commission. Gary Harpole. Weak Democrat. So this right here is proof they're infiltrating the Republican Party. It tells you right there.
We're letting them do it.
We're letting them do it. And we're electing them as Republicans, but in reality, according to this, they're Democrats.
And basically, this is the gospel here, right?
This is coming straight off of GOP Data Center. This is coming from the Republican Party's data that they use in elections to create walking lists and things like that. And all of the chairmen get access to this.
All right, we're going to talk more about this. I got to get a break in. Let's do that and finish that up. Don't forget about East End Towing. They will make sure that you get to where you want to get to if your car breaks down. And so you can get your car fixed and get back on the road again. Or let's say in the morning you come out and you push the button to start your car and nothing happens. And you want somebody to come out and check out your battery and whatnot. East End Towing can do that for you as well. Or if you're at Wally World or Marco's Pizza like I've been, and the car, or even Waffle House, the car doesn't work right and you need somebody to come out, all you got to do is call East End Towing. Number one, they understand the law. Number two, they got the equipment to carry out what you need to have happen. And number three, you know that they'll do it. As East End Towing, call them when you need help. And that is 1-501-888-8849. That's 1-501-888-8849.
Well, folks, it does look like this is an update that's being done by the Dave Elswick Show on how Democrat operatives are kicking conservatives out of the Republican Party, how they are breaking rules and cheating folks in order to do so. Looks like they're on a commercial break of some sort. So, as the thing shows, they'll be right back. I've been in the middle of this. I know probably the biggest example of this is the convention before last, the Arkansas State Convention, where these Democrat operatives, mainly Melanie Golick, Chris Caldwell, and others, sabotaged the Pulaski County Republican Committee from being able to even attend the last convention. They screwed up the process for picking delegates to that state convention. This is the 2024 state convention, and then set up a fake credentialing committee in order to kick conservatives out, then proceeded to make up a rule they put up what they claimed was a bad ballot. Turns out it was not an actual ballot. It was one of the ones that was later scrapped. And they got away with that. They also illegally hired the Little Rock Police Department to threaten us with arrest when we tried to go there and exercise our rights. And since then, more and more conservatives have been kicked out, usually with made-up rules. Let's see if I can get this down right. Actually, let me see if let me go ahead and get I will get my microphone in just a little bit.
All right, back with you, Dave Elswick Show.
Okay, they're back.
Lori Justice is here, just an everyday Arkansan now.
Yeah.
And Robert Steinbach here, law professor and whatnot. How are they getting by with all of this, Robert? I mean, there's a lot of things that are going on that are shady, and it's like you can't press it. You know what I'm saying? It's up to a few people in the party, and whatever they say flies. Is there any way? I mean, is there any recourse? I mean, do you have to sue your own party to be able to get some of this stuff taken care of?
Well, certainly that would be the only recourse, but even there, that's a rather limited opportunity in the sense that it's a private organization. Now, it's a quasi-private organization because, of course, it intersects with elections. And so courts have historically exerted some authority over party actions depending on how they implicate voting more broadly in elections. So, but the flip side is that courts also have resisted getting too deep into the operations of a party, saying, well, it's a private club. You know, if you made a baseball club and someone said, well, you're not playing by the rules. they would say, all right, well, that's for you guys to figure out.
Yeah, that's kind of how I figured out when they said that the last state meeting we had a couple of years ago, where we got in and we made a lot of wholesale changes, that none of that stood because it was illegal, and I didn't see anything illegal about it at all, to be honest.
Yeah, no, the election stuff does fall under the law.
Okay.
So there, if you're an elected official or something like that, I mean, that would fall under the law. But the bottom line is that in the governor's office, I mean, she and her goons are controlling the RPA. That's what's happening. And, they could put a stop to it, but they're the ones driving it. And, in fact, a couple of weekends ago, I don't know if you went to the state meeting.
I did not.
You did not, and I didn't either. But I did see parts of it that were recorded.
What's the reason?
Exactly. But what happened at that state meeting? Is that there were several rules changes that were submitted in a timely manner, according to the rules, and the RPA and the Rules Committee decided they didn't like them. So this is actually the first time that timely submissions to the state meeting were not allowed to be heard at the whim of the state chairman and the Rules Committee. It was just like what happened at the convention. Yeah, we don't like these changes, so we're not going to listen to them. We're not going to even hear them. We're not going to listen to them. We're not going to let you vote on them because we don't like them.
Yeah, and we know what way the vote's going to go.
Exactly. They know they're outnumbered, and cheating is the only way that they can win. Because most people are like us. They're conservative, and they expect that from the Republican Party. You don't expect Democrats. I don't want Democrats elected as an R.
Well, that's why I want closed primaries.
And if you go back, when I had access to that, I had access to GOP Data Center when I was a chairman. And I looked up every single legislator that we have. And up until about 10 years ago, a lot of them who've been in for a long time now, not the freshman legislators and new people, but the ones who've been in for a very long time, were voting Democrat until about 10 years ago, when we all of a sudden turned red. So, we all of a sudden turned red. So did we just get a bunch of Republicans born in Arkansas? Did we have people that moved here? I mean, where did all these Republicans come from? Because we were blue. So that leaves that question. So all these people were voting Democrat. Now they're Republican. They got an R by their name. And our state can claim to be a red supermajority, but we can't get conservative legislation passed because while we may have a lot of R's, those R's are not conservative people.
All right. So let me swing it over to Robert here for a moment. So what do we do, Robert? How do we fight this? It doesn't seem to me that you can fight this.
I don't know. It's a problem when, as I talked about in my column about the raising of these fees, you know who raised the fees? Was the executive committee. It wasn't even voted on.
Which is a smaller group.
Oh, it's like a handful of people.
Yeah.
I think it's a half dozen people or so. Right?
Yeah.
More than that, but yeah.
More? Yeah. So it's... and the same thing happened with closed primaries. All these Republicans made the claim that they were interested in closed primaries. And then when that issue came up, they keep dodging. Oh, it's too soon.
Yeah.
Take too long. You know how I heard that, what was it, 6 years ago now? Take too long. Well, it's 6 years later. How long does it take?
Or, well, you know how what they're doing, Dave, on that? They're disenfranchising people from being Republicans and taking away their Republicanness or whatever, and we don't have enough time to notify them and let them go down. Well,
that's the thing about taking too long. Well, we've had 6 years that this at least has been on the table. So how much notice do you need? And when they say, oh well, there might be a Republican who forgot to register as a Republican and therefore can't vote in the primary. By the way, you could make a rule that you could register at the polling place.
That's how it was supposed to be. Right. Yes, the first time.
Yeah, so that's also a nonsensical claim. But here's what truly is happening, and there's no doubt about it. Democrats vote in the Republican primary because you can choose your ballot. And you can say, well,
so you're looking for the weakest Republican to run.
Right. And the reason some elected officials don't want to go to closed primaries is they figure, well, I won with Democrats voting in the primary, so maybe that's better for me. And how do I know it? That Democrats are voting in the Republican primaries? Because I know Democrats who tell me they're voting in the Republican primary. And they tell me they're voting for the most liberal candidate amongst the Republicans. That's their preference. Now, it doesn't affect every election, but affects some. Moreover, should we not have a voting scheme in the Republican Party such that Republicans, that is conservatives, vote for their candidates?
Well, and if you remember, we also in a state meeting, and a governor voted against this, that you have to be, we wanted it to be where a rule where you had to be a Republican to run for office as a Republican. You have to be a registered Republican. The governor voted no on that. Why? I mean, what's the?
Yeah, I don't
why
understand
would
that
you,
one either.
Well, right here's why. Because we can have Democrats in our county committees. We can have like I said, one of these, the hard Democrat in here, he's their county judge. I mean, we don't want this. We want conservatives. I want Republicans running as Republicans. The person I'm voting for, I want them to agree with the same platform and principles that I agree with, but we're voting for these people thinking they're Republicans, and they're not. They are not Republicans. That's not acceptable.
Well, I agree with that. And I've been arguing that point for a long time. But I don't go anywhere. I mean, I used to talk to Doyle Webb about this all the time. And he said, well, it's a way of getting new blood in, Dave, that kind of thing.
Blue blood.
And I said, okay, fine and dandy. But shouldn't it be Republican blood? And he didn't have an answer for that.
Well, this is exposing our party, and what's happening is then leadership, they're just eliminating those who are challenging this, and people who are standing up and saying, this is not okay in our party.
All right, let's take a break. We got to do that. Then we'll be back with more here on the Dave Elswick Show.
Well, folks, it looks like they're on another break. This is the Dave Elswick Show, giving an update with Lori Justice, former Pulaski County GOP committee chair who was recently kicked out of the Republican Party of Arkansas, and Robert Steinbuck, who are talking about the problems regarding the Republican Party of Arkansas. Here's a brilliant comment here on their Facebook page. It says, imagine someone complaining about the parliamentarian the state chairman brought in, and then based on the complaint, that parliamentarian is removed from the Republican Party, is banned from any property owned by the Republican Party, banned from attending any events hosted by the Republican Party. That is essentially what the Arkansas Republican Party did to Lori when she was parliamentarian for another county committee. And of course, you're not even supposed to be able to file a problem with it in another committee. It would have to be someone from the Pulaski County Committee to file that kind of complaint. But of course, that's one of the many rules that were broken over a rule that was made up. What I hope they talk about when they come back is some of the people involved in this. They've mentioned Belinda Harris Ritter. She's the one who made up the rule regarding inactive members. Sarah Huckabee Sanders and her goons, as I mentioned, but they need to be specific. Of course, Chris Caldwell is one. He was Sarah Huckabee Sanders' campaign manager. He now owns a consulting firm. He shut down the winter committee meeting last session. During the winter committee meeting, they had a 2-page agenda where they got reports from various chairs of organizations. After about that first page, Chris Caldwell made a motion to adjourn, and Joseph Wood, the chair, went ahead and accepted it. It was the summer meeting. Sorry. And they adjourned the meeting without even doing about half of the agenda. And so these Democrat operatives who pretend to be Republican haven't just infiltrated the Republican Party. They're running it from behind the scenes, and they're sabotaging conservative efforts, like the effort to close primaries, like the effort to require someone to be registered as a Republican to run as a Republican candidate. And until these operatives are removed from the Republican Party, this type of behavior is going to continue. Here's the website of ArkansasGOP.info that they mentioned earlier. This has all the details regarding the Craighead County complaint. And it's supposed to have some other updates. It's a pretty long read. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's several pages. But if you have questions or comments, they have a page on there at the bottom where you can talk about what's going on in your own committee. There's several committees across the state. Or ask a question. Okay, somebody asked, morning all, I'm a lifelong Republican. I live in Saline County. I feel disenfranchised by the state level party. Are they all in for ASA? Okay. There were response, there were ASA people, but now claim to be MAGA because Trump's popularity. They are removing MAGA from the party. And then suggest go to the website. Yeah, Asa Hutchinson was a former governor of Arkansas. He was what we call a Republican name only. And he fought to stop the SAFE Act, a bill which would have protected women in sports from these transgender folks. Actually would have protected young children from being surgically operated on. This mutilation of children they call transgender surgery. He joined the Arkansas Chamber of Commerce and the ACLU in fighting that. And so far, they've managed to neutralize that law in the state of Arkansas. So children are still being abused because of that effort. He sabotaged an effort to put this stand your ground law. And then he cut taxes and would brag about it, but then would raise taxes on the other end. Okay, let me see if they're back from their break yet.
Those were my school colors, by the way.
Deep blue for the Democratic Party, I guess.
Don't go there.
Oh.
Get me in trouble.
Oh.
You'll get me in trouble. All right, what's going on with your column this week?
So my colleague from the paper, Gwen Falkenberry, wrote a very nice column last week, and she's a teacher. She teaches English. I forget where. And she talked about how AI is a problem in her English classes because she'll give an assignment and then the students can say, type in the assignment to AI and it punches out a response.
Yeah.
And she points out that
It
students
may not be right, though.
well, indeed, beyond it not being right, she points out that students, even non-English majors, everyone takes English. And why? Because it teaches you how to think and how to communicate. So when I read that column, I thought to myself, well, that's really interesting, because what we do in law school is that notion on steroids. We always say, it's a common refrain in law schools, that legal education is learning how to think like a lawyer. People think that you go to law schools to learn a bunch of rules, learn a bunch of laws. Not true. Because laws change. Now, it's not that you don't learn any laws, because you have to learn sort of the basic structure of, say, contract law, or what we call tort law, which most people would generally think about negligence law, meaning malpractice or car accident law, right? That's a separate class. There's property law. So there are a bunch of rules in each of those and other classes, of course. And we learn sort of the big rules, the common rules that may change, but are significant enough that they're not likely to change willy-nilly. And so we learn those rules to have a basic understanding of the architecture of that area of law, and then understand what the law is trying to achieve, so that we can analyze cases, statutes, sometimes treatises, so as to make arguments in a future case. Right? In other words, if you find something that has been already addressed, you just say, well, that's answered by this. The question is, what happens when something changes, some fact changes? And the skill that lawyers are supposed to have is to say, well, that fact changes the outcome or doesn't change the outcome, and here's why. That's what thinking like a lawyer is all about. So I point out in my column that we do precisely what Gwen was talking about, but even more so. And it brings up a thought. There has been this sort of movement, this critique of how we do law school. If you've watched any television or movies, you've seen what law school is like, right? You go into class. Paper chase. It's a big room, and the professor calls on a student and says, tell us what some particular case was about. So you have a background understanding of the facts. And then what did the court rule? And most importantly, why?
Why did it rule that way?
And then the professor says, okay, let's change this fact. How does that change the outcome? Let's change this fact. Let's change this rule. How does that change the outcome? All of that, of course, is thinking like a lawyer. And Glenn was talking about AI, which is sort of a technology development. And one of the things that we're doing at the Bowen Law School is we are putting our night program online. Problem is, we don't particularly know what that means yet, because you could have an online program much like we did during COVID, where everybody shows up in class or at home, really,
right?
But in a virtual class, you log in, there's me, there's the students, and I do what I do in the classroom. I called on students and they would present material and then we would discuss it. And it's a little bit more cumbersome, but I think you can get sort of very quick in using that device rather than being in person. And it's the same thing. And we have what's called the Socratic method. What I was describing before is what's called the Socratic method, obviously based on Socrates, which is
asking questions.
Right. But that notion is a relatively new notion in law school. It's only been around for about 150 years when the then dean of Harvard Law School came up with it, a guy by the name of Langdell, and it spread throughout law schools throughout the country. And so we're going to go online for our night program. Could be completely consistent with that. But then there's this notion of what they call asynchronous education. I don't like the term, but it's really sort of correspondence school. Oh, log in and watch a video or read this material and then write these responses. By the way, those responses being written either by the student or AI. That was the point that Gwen raised and made me think about all this. And so we are really at a turning point at the law school because if we go down the correspondence school model of night school of education, of legal education, we are going to have a real problem in the future with the quality of the students that we graduate. It's going to be a real. Ironically, our law school started, I think, about 100 years ago. We're celebrating the 50th anniversary because it's gone through many changes. And the 50th anniversary, I think, is when the school associated with UALR, UA Little Rock. But 100 years ago, this was a private, for-profit school, and they taught by lecture generally. And that was a disfavored method of learning law because of this innovation by that fellow I mentioned, Langdell. And so if we sort of create this correspondence school method of legal education, we'll actually go back to how the school started, and the method largely, if not entirely, well, I'll just say largely rejected by legal education. But the criticisms against the Socratic method include, well, it's really old.
Yeah.
It's 150 years old out of 3,000 years of legal education. That's really new. Well, a white guy created it. That's always a mark against any innovation.
Absolutely.
Right. And
those people don't know anything. Just ask me.
Right. And then the final one, which is my favorite, which is, well, you see, the Socratic method of lecturing, and it's not lecture, right? It's interactive, is stress inducing. Oh my goodness. And the response to that is, yeah, that's precisely right. That's precisely how it's designed to operate.
How do you perform under stress?
Right. Because guess what? That's what's going to happen in court. I detail in my column that I had an oral argument up in Jonesboro recently on the case in which I'm representing those two patriots, you might recall, who were defamed by two lefties. And we had oral argument. It was probably the longest oral argument I had in my career. Mm-hmm. And as you know, I've been practicing for a long time. And he's a very nice state court judge up there in Jonesboro and very polite. And he apologized to both me and my opposing counsel for interrupting us. And both and I know it's the case for my opposing counsel, we said, really, not only did we not mind, we encourage it. Because the job of the lawyer in that context is not to give a speech, right? I'm not hired to give a speech. Mm-hmm. I'm hired to convince the judge. So what's better, me just giving a monologue or the judge asking me the questions that he's really interested in so that he can make up his mind? Well, clearly the latter. And that's precisely what we do in Socratic learning, and precisely what's lost if you go to a correspondence school method of online education. So I don't know what we're going to be doing, because one of the odd things I will say about how we voted to go online is we voted to go online before we decided how we're going to go online. So it's a little cart before the horse. But in any event, I'm hopeful. Don't get me wrong. I'm hopeful that we will go online in the right fashion, such that I can hold my class live. And if some other professors want to have one of their, say, two classes not live but recorded or something else, some reading material, have at it. Do what you want. That's what academic freedom is about, after all. And so I think that would be a reasonable solution. But if we go to a correspondence school model where at least one of the two classes per week, usually classes are divided into twice a week, if one of the classes is not live for everybody's class by mandate, that's going to be a problem for the product that we produce 3 years or 4 years down the road and thereafter.
Absolutely, because that's how you learn. That's right. You have to ask, and generally, as I went to UALR, wasn't in law school, but I was back in the day when we sat in the big room and you had a lecture and you actually took notes and that kind of thing.
I didn't take
notes. and so, that if you have a question, most likely somebody else in the room has the same question. And if you can ask questions and interact with the instructor, you're helping other people as well. That's how you learn. You can't just sit there and watch something and learn. Then you've got to Google if you have a question, and you know how that goes. It may not be the right answer. And
well, I spoke to a guy who likes the notion of online education, and when I said, "Oh, the law school is considering going online, but there is this concern about not having live classes as a general matter, shall we say. He said, this is a guy who's a pro online education. He said, oh, you can't do that for legal education and really any significant graduate education. He said, when I taught about himself, he goes,
what the professor said went.
Well, but A, that's true. But he also said no two classes were the same because I was directed by the questions being asked by students.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't do that if you don't have a live reaction from students. And he said precisely what Lori said, which is if you get a question from one student, that means 10 students have that question.
Well, it's easier. I think the way where you just watch a video and answer questions, it's easier. You don't have to worry about being put on the spot and your professor asking you something you don't know. And like you were saying, stress. I mean, but if you're going to be an attorney or just about anything, you need to be able to handle stress. You need to be able to work under stress. And that's, I would think, would be part of that job. And part of that job would be preparing students for that, because otherwise they're going to get into the real world and their eyes are going to be open, and something that they're not used to dealing with, they're going to be hit in the face with.
Well, it's designed, right? Law school is designed. I say this in the column, in fact.
To challenge you.
A, to challenge you, but B, to mimic what it's like in court. That's why I said when my colleague, my opposing counsel, who I call a colleague because he's a friend of mine, and I were in court, we wanted to be challenged by the judge, not because we want to get into a verbal debate, but because the challenge by the judge tells us precisely where we need to go in our arguments. And this judge also was very smart. He would say, you don't need to address the such and such argument because I've decided that already. I told us. He said, that's not going to be an issue. I'm not going to, for example, there was a motion that the other side made and they wanted to kick out a certain document that I filed. And they had two bases. One, they said that I filed it at the wrong time. I didn't. And then the second time, the second argument was that we couldn't do the things in the document that we're trying to do. And I won't go into more details just because it's boring, not because I'm trying to, withhold anything. And the judge said,